Ben and Chris whether this is okay to show what we have developed. And as they said, well, Martin, this is open source what you're doing. We are here in an open source community, so it's absolutely fine that you're showing what you are doing. And so I'm very happy to show you what is it that we did in our latest product and latest version, and what are the upcoming things that you want to do. The first thing, who of you heavily uses Hiera? That's almost everybody, okay. Have you ever been in the situation where you wondered yourself, why does a node have a specific configuration? Everybody has, yeah. And then you had to dig into your Hiera data. And then you start using Puppet lookup command on the command line, trying to get everything, get the proper node. You need a Puppet DB, otherwise you must provide a JSON file with all the facts from the node to see, okay, using the explain option to see what is happening within Hiera and why do I get not the result that I expected. And afterwards you have to analyze a huge amount of output, identifying where is my mistake. I was in that same situation and I was super frustrated by using the Puppet lookup tool, saying this is not really the greatest thing to do it. So I'm Martin, living in Berlin. As I mentioned it here in front, someone within a conference, there was an introduction where I was introduced as being the Puppet dinosaur, because I'm doing that stuff back since 2007, I suppose. So starting with Puppet 0.24, I suppose, was the first version. Afterwards there was 0.25. Then came Puppet 2.6, so whoever tells you Puppet 0.1, that version never existed. They switched from 0.25 and just moved the dot by one and had the Puppet version 2.6 by then. This was the time when Puppet received their venture capital funding and they said, please stop doing zero anything versions. So, Hiera. Personally, I consider Hiera being one of the most powerful tools inside of Puppet, because you can use Hiera for almost anything. It usually was meant to be a separation of code and data, so that you don't have to do data processing in your code, like based on an operating system, I'm making a decision, how does the package name look like, what is the service name, where are config files available, is there a certain run as user that must be available, and this was just insane in the Puppet code and hard to maintain. So what you do nowadays is that you're saying, within my Puppet class, I have parameters, and within my Puppet module, I can have a Hiera YAML file, and within that Hiera YAML file, I can use hierarchies based on operating system specific information, like os.family, os.name, os.release major, for example. And then you can place this information into Hiera, and the second benefit compared to having this data in code is anyone who's using this module has the ability to override the default Hiera settings by using his own Hiera data. So for example, we had a customer who was compiling their Apache manually, so of course in an automated process, but they did some patches next to it. And then they just didn't name the thing Apache, because they say, oh, Apache is the package inside the operating system, so it's not good naming that thing Apache. So they prefixed it with the company name, Apache. They were not running under the Apache 2 or HTTPD user, so they had a different user, and of course the service had another name. In the former times where this was placed in code, it was not possible to make this code working. You had to adopt the code. And now you have Hiera, and all that's what the people do is we include the standard Apache or Nginx class, and we provide a set of Hiera data that override the default from the module by specifying this is the package name, this is the config file, this is the service that we are going to start. When you look at your control repository, you will also find a Hiera file, but here you usually don't take care of operating system specific things. We sometimes see that too, but the big thing that you want to identify is, why are there differences in my infrastructure? You might have something like a common layer, which is something like the foundation, which is used for basically most of your systems. And then you can put layers on top that describe, from a node perspective, the node in a more individual, less generic way. So, for example, you can add something like, which location is that system in? Location can apply to geographic location or network location. So you say, is this somewhere inside a specific secure network, or is the system located in Zurich, or is it in Sydney? Maybe you need to configure differently according to where's the local NTP server, where's my backup server, different settings. The next layer that you would usually have on a node is that the node has a use case running for a specific reason, which usually means you have an application running on that node. We know some customers who even say, yes, we have one application, but that application consists of several services spread over multiple nodes. So we're even adding a higher layer regarding application and which part of the application, which service is running on systems, which could be many. And last but least, you usually see something like a node-specific configuration. And of course, I almost forgot it, you might have the same application and same service running in the same location, in the same network, in the same data center, but one is running in production mode and the other one is used for development or testing purposes or training purposes. And of course, you want to have these systems using different databases. That is why I added the stage next to it. What we always kindly insist on is that your higher layers are all built on facts, not on top scope variables that you calculate via manifest site PP. First, this is time consuming. If you have something like a naming pattern and you say, I can easily identify location, which application, which service, which stage by just looking at the host name of the system, or it's even maybe part of the domain. For example, the location is just part of a subdomain for your major domain. Then you can just write a custom fact so that your load for identifying this information does not happen on the compiler, but already done on the agent and is delivered as facts. We will see why we need this when we move on to our application. As I mentioned, also a module can have Hiera YAML file and Hiera data inside. If you want to see how this is working, maybe check the NTP, Puppet Labs NTP module, which was in the past the prototype where they first tried this. How is this working when we now move data from code, from params PP, for example, into a Hiera data structure? When I saw this for the first time, I was quite shocked. I wasn't aware that NTP has so many different options to be configured. So it was a huge list, really tremendous. And as I mentioned, within modules, you usually take care on different so want to support different operating systems, and therefore you have Hiera layers built based on operating system level. What else can I do with Hiera? Most of our customers nowadays use Hiera for node classification. There are two different approaches. The simple one is inside PP, we just use lookup and we iterate over the array that we retrieve and we just say contain on anything that's inside. Well, that's only partly true because we're not using each to iterate, we're using reverse each because Hiera returns the keys that we are looking for from node specific to common layer, but we first want to have the classes from the common layer and then the classes from the node layer to be compiled by the catalog, because this is the processing how they appear also in the catalog afterwards. That's the simple, the array-based classification. Within the blog post that is mentioned here, we are also covering a hash-based classification where the key is an identifier, just a name, and you can prefix that name with a number and then we sort by the keys, and this allows you to also add classes to node-specific configuration, which must be done very, very early by just doing the right ordering. And you have the option to remove classes, maybe on a node layer, where you say this class maybe not in that node layer. You just specify the key from the common layer and you just provide an empty string. And the manifest site PP ensures if it's an empty string, I'm just printing out a echo or notify message that this class is disabled, this key is disabled on that node in any kind of layer. You need lookup options for doing so. Who's using lookup options? Almost everybody, okay. So, but once again, the problem now, how to analyze if a node receives the proper configuration. First thing I mentioned it, log into your Puppet server, become the root user. What? Yes, you must be the root user because you need access to the certificates to connect to PuppetDB when you want to provide Puppet lookup node instead of just adding a JSON file. And do you really, otherwise you first must go to your agent, get all the facts. If you need trusted facts inside of Hiera, you have to manually add them to that JSON output, copy that over to your Puppet server, run the Puppet lookup command with -- facts, and then you just provide the JSON file. Another option is to get the JSON file also on your Puppet server, which must be run in root, and you can use the Puppet facts with the termini PuppetDB to receive all the facts in one shot, also the trusted facts. But you still must be root on the Puppet server. And usually we tell all of our customers, limit access to your Puppet server. The Puppet server is the heart of your automation infrastructure. So just limit it, and the best thing is to just disable SSH access. So you cannot access the Puppet server anymore. At most customers, there's only a few people, maybe 2 or 3, who have a key added to the Puppet server, so they're able to log in, but as user only, and they have very, very restricted pseudo permissions on which kind of commands are they allowed to run. Basically, it's for analyzing when something is really broken on the Puppet server. The second thing is, check your Hiera YAML. Look what kind of facts you have provided with all the hierarchies. Check the nodes, the facts on the node, and then do an in-brain parsing about which files are now used. Check if these files are available, because that's optional. Not all files must exist on a Hiera, in the Hiera data structure. And then you need to check for the key in each of these files, whether the key is available or not. And please don't forget to look for the lookup options, whether this key might be merged differently, or this is the first merge because it's overwritten on a node layer. Time-consuming and quite error-prone, and usually you'll also miss typos. We see this regularly. So this is the reason why I thought by myself already almost 3 years ago, 4 years ago, there should be another solution available. And I thought about something that is more simple to use for user perspective without logging into the Puppet server. So not logging into the Puppet server, but seeing something on the Puppet server means we need to get a web UI. So the core principle of HDM is that it is a web UI presenting you Hiera data from your Puppet server. So it means HDM must run on a system which has access to PuppetDB and access to the code base, and that's it. It's developed under a GPL license. It's hosted on GitHub. There we also provide the containers. Containers are also available under Docker Hub, and Docker luckily made HDM a supported OSS container, so we don't have this download limits like we have with other containers. What is it that HDM needs? HDM needs the fully deployed R10K deployed code. This can be your Puppet server, it can be a compiler, it could be any other system. And HDM needs access to PuppetDB. Whether this is a local PuppetDB or a remote PuppetDB, whether this is done authentication via certificates or in Puppet Enterprise via a token, that is configurable. That's okay. So HDM starts and reads information which environments do exist from PuppetDB. Compares them with a list of environments that are in your local environment path. It then identifies that you might have already an environment deployed, maybe a feature branch, where you do a data change, but that is not taken into account by any node yet, because all your nodes running against the production environment and not against the feature branch. So this already allows us to identify, is this environment in use or is it not in use at the moment? Once you have selected an environment, HDM queries PuppetDB for what kind of nodes to make use of this environment, or to be more precise, it fetches all node information, all cert names from all nodes that are connected to your PuppetDB. And usually we will filter and say we only show the nodes that are available in that environment, but there is a little button which allows you to select any kind of node. I will explain later why we have that features in this, implemented in that way. So requirements is it must read the deployed code, it must have read access to PuppetDB. The Hiera config file must be built on facts or trusted facts. Because we're not compiling catalogs, so we can't look into what happens in manifest site PP if you use top scope variables. We started developing this as a Ruby on Rails application, and the first idea was, well, there's Ruby inside any Puppet server. Just let's use this Ruby and just add a Ruby on Rails application on top on that existing Ruby version. We had customers that uses Puppet 7, so this is Ruby 2.7, I suppose. We have customers that now are with Puppet 8, now we have Ruby version 3. And our core developer mentioned he doesn't like to use an older Ruby version, he prefers using modern Ruby version and the latest Ruby on Rails application. So now it needs an actual Ruby version, an actual maintained Ruby version. There are two ways how you can run this, the application. One is somehow get a Ruby version, RVM, RVN, whatsoever, manually compiled and packaged or somewhat. And the other option is that we run HDM inside a container where we have the proper Ruby version just inside and we just add our application on top. The container is, from our perspective, the preferred solution compared to installing everything locally, because there are lots of dependencies, you must install a huge amount of them. So what is it that HDM has at the moment? We directly started with user authentication. We can connect to LDAP or an Active Directory, and we can integrate into, for example, Keycloak. Why do we need this? First of all, maybe you don't want everybody to directly access this information because there might be sensitive data inside, so you want to limit access to the system itself. Of course, you can run it in unauthenticated mode. This is what we usually do in demos. You have role-based access control, which means you can, based on users or groups, provide access to specific environments only, to specific nodes only, to specific keys only, and you have the option to enable or disable whether a user is allowed to unencrypt encrypted values, YAML. So there's also YAML support inside. We have the option on not only viewing data, but writing data back. This needs far more testing at the moment. We are using a Git repository then, and you must adopt your Hiera data, that the specific Hiera data comes from another Git repository. This is something that definitely needs testing, but at the moment people are also happy having a view on what is happening. So, HDM version 3 added 2 new features. The first one is we are able to show global Hiera data. Usually I was thinking global Hiera data is deprecated, which is not true, because when you see Puppet Enterprise, you must have a global Hiera YAML file, because this global Hiera YAML file is needed to access the console data that you can put into the web interface from Puppet Enterprise. So that's the first thing. If you have a global Hiera YAML, we can also show these layers. If we have module data and you have selected a key which is part of a module, we will also show you the module layers. We will not show all keys from all modules because this would need too much parsing. We have to need some caching effects and stuff like that. And with the latest release, you can put, some people requested it, when you select a node, we show up to 6 different facts that you can put in there. For example, if your cert name does not match the FQDN or stuff like that, that you have additional information at hand. So when you log into HDM, this is now running in Linux mode, you first say, I want to select my environment, and here you see I have a production environment which is in use, and there is a common environment rolled out, but no node uses this environment. Once you've selected that, you will see there is here the button only from selected environment, which will limit the list only for the nodes that use actually this environment. If you remove this button and just make it out, you see all the nodes that are connected to your Puppet server. In this case, there's only one node, and we even provide the information it's using the production branch. Once you selected the node, this is again now with the button off, which is no difference since there's only one node. Once you've selected your node, you see all hierarchies that are available to that node. So we're getting the facts from PuppetDB, we are parsing all of the YAML file, or parsing the Hiera YAML. We are parsing all of the YAML files that are taken into account for this node, and then we just show these are all the keys that are in all YAML files or JSON files which belong to this node. Once you select a key, you see there's the global layer, This is inverted, so this file does not exist. Here you see a bold one. This makes you recognizing there's data in this file. Here is a normal written one, which means that file is available, but no data are inside. When you open now the single where items are inside, you can see classes is an array of HDM, PuppetDB, and PuppetDB master config. This is how we configure an open source Puppet server additionally to HDM. So that we have PuppetDB again.
We're on time as soon as you can, right?
Okay. And if you select the key that is part of a module, we will even show the module layers. We learned that you can identify typos, disable authentication spelled wrong. We can unencrypt Hiera values. It's an option, and we have a formal integration already working. We just need to build the Debian packages. These are still missing, but on Red Hat it's already working. Thanks for HDM4. Yes, come to our booth, give us a shout out what else you need. We are looking forward for feedback from the community. So, hopefully if you want a demo, I have a demo on my laptop available. And the next person is already, I suppose, waiting outside for the next talk. Yes. So, thank you. I'm very sorry, it took a little bit longer than expected.